I am so excited that we have our guest artist, John Henry, today. John's work, from the minute I saw it, I was riveted by it. I thought it was simultaneously like it inhabited multiple worlds. It felt like documentary, but then it was also theatrical, was conceptual. And to me, it really had everything that photography now in 2022 should have. Like, the craft of it was beautiful, but then the message behind it was so strong and so of our time. And it's interesting, seeing his work, I was like, oh man, that'd be great to have him as a guest artist, just for purely selfish reasons. I wanted to hear him speak. It was as simple as that. And I was like, I'll never be able to get him to talk. And then through one confluence of another, one of his students reached out to me, and I was like, ooh, there is my in. And John is kind, generous, inspiring, and he, talking to him yesterday before the class, he's everything that his work is as well. And so let's welcome our guest artist, John Henry.
Thank you. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
All right, perfect. I'm going to hit the magic button to share the screen. And can everyone see that? Blink once if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you, Timothy, for having me, and thank you everybody for the invitation and for being here. Yeah, we're going to talk about Stranger Fruit, the project I've been working on for the past, feels like forever, 8 years. My goodness, what year is this? In a fairly linear fashion, how the work started and then back to its roots and then take it from each element moving forward. And there are a couple underlying themes I want you to, I guess, remember that I'm going to keep coming back to as we go through the work. One of them is a simple idea executed well. Oftentimes in art, it doesn't need to be complicated or too many elements in the work. Sometimes just a straightforward idea executed well can carry through. And the other thing that is really important to my practice are the ideas of research and reference, knowing what is out there and how you can speak to what has come before. So that those two words always come back to the work that I'm creating, whether it be Stranger Fruit or anything else that I'm working on. So, way back when, the work began with this image in 2014. And, at the time I was unsure of what to create, but the need to create existed. This project, Stranger Fruit, was created in response to the murders of African-American men due to police violence. Now, while the first image created in 2014, the project really began in 2008, 2006, 2008, with the verdict of, with the murder of Sean Bell. I'm born and raised in Queens, New York. Sean Bell was murdered at his bachelor party by the New York Police Department the night before he was to get married. And something about this really stayed with me for really all those years. Some of it was the pictures in the paper. A lot of it was the story. I was a year older than him when this happened. It was in Jamaica, Queens, which was 20, 30 minutes down the road from me. So there was a really close familiarity of events. Fast forward to 2008 when the trial was happening, and I remember it so well. I had just come back from Vienna visiting family, and the next day that I was going back to work was the verdict of this trial. And I remember the cops getting off and nothing being done. And that really made me think of the families, think of his wife that he would never get to marry, his fiance, his baby that he would never get to see grow older. And then I started to think of the family, the extended family, what happens to them. And later that year in 2008, one of my good friends was getting married, and at his bachelor party in the middle of New Jersey, we're there again, supposed to celebrate my friend getting married the next morning, and all I could think of was Sean Bell. All I could think of was, what if this was happening to him? What if this was happening to us? And then beyond that, what happens to the family? What are the families left with? these, tragedies take on the same form of events every time they happen. And, unfortunately, we're still going through this as we see what's happening in Akron right now. There is, the information gets released. There is, protest and outrage. There is, interviews with the mothers, with the families who have, lost, their loved one for absolutely nothing. And then trial, and, there may be, whether there's justice dealt at the trial or not, that's still not justice. We've still lost a life for absolutely nothing. So there have been many, artists who are addressing this, writers, photographers, videographers, but from the mother's perspective, I thought that was missing in this story. And again, fast forward, that brings us back to, 2014. And it was a lot of, reflecting and thinking of, how I could make the work. And, I wanted something formal for that first image, it's close to a recreation of the Pieta, but I really didn't know where this was going, if this was a project, if this was a standalone work. At the time, I was photographing athletes mostly. I was photographing the New York Mets, the New York Jets. I was photographing on-field sports, but mostly with an athletic focus. So this was a large departure from that. But again, so what I was doing was I was interested in research first. So I made this first image in the church that I used to work in way back when. Again, having access to it, and I brought my 4x5, and I brought a friend and his mother, and we made this image. And like I said, from 2008 to 2014, I just didn't have the visual language to say what I wanted to say. But with this image, I thought that I was starting to answer it. But again, the next steps are trying to figure out, where does it go from here? So that's when the research really started to kick into high gear. And I started to look at, just different versions of the Pieta, working with, the Michelangelo from 1498 on the left, and painting by Titian from 1575 on the right. And why the Pieta? Again, was thinking of that mother-son connection in art. And I, through working at the church and studying painting independently and really being glued to stained glass, the stained glass works, I was always glued to religious iconography. So it made sense that it would be a perfect landing spot, thinking of that mother-son relationship. This overwhelming feeling of sorrow, grief, leading to frustration and anger. But I wasn't satisfied just looking at classical renditions of the Pieta. I started to look at more contemporary versions as well. So versions like these two, both from Andres Serrano, to vastly different interpretations. And then I'm looking at other artists, reconstructions, putting their own spin on the work. But the real breakthrough for the project was when I came across these two versions of the Pieta, on the left by Renee Cox and on the right by Dr. David Driscoll. And this really was a breakthrough in the project for me. On the left, Renee Cox is the mother figure in the piece titled Ain't Yo Mama's Pieta. And this really opened up a whole new world for me, because at the time I hadn't thought about the importance of the Black body, but being authored by a Black artist, having that agency over, the narrative of who's telling the story and why, and what are they saying with those words, with those images. And again, really honing in on that mother-son connection. This opened up a whole new door, thinking of, masculinity, identity, and vulnerability. On the right, with Dr. David Driscoll's piece, Behold Thy Son from 1956, he painted this 1 year after the brutal murder of Emmett Till, whose murder sparked the civil rights movement here in America. He was so moved by that murder that he felt the need that he had to paint this. He had to create this painting. So there were parallels between Dr. David Driscoll's feelings with Emmett Till and my feelings with Sean Bell. So that's why I knew that this was a project, that this was something that needed to be investigated. This was something that I needed to follow through on and just take it step by step, and, no real idea of an end goal in sight, but just to work on it. So there are a couple of things that were really important while I was making the work, or at least, at the initial stages. And one was I wanted all the men, all the boys to, thinking of vulnerability and skin, how it relates to protection, to be topless and barefoot. Just thinking of like protection and how vulnerable the skin can be, when you're exposed. And, another really important thing for the project, as I realized early on in like the first stages of it, was the gaze, was the mother looking directly into the viewer. What does that do for us as a viewer? How do we feel? And, this comes directly from another version of the Pietà by William A. Bouguereau from 1876. And there's something, very striking about Mary's eyes in this, where it's, very difficult to encounter this work and then look away. Every time I look at it, I'm forced to look at it, and then I start to look at, all the other figures, all the other angel figures, looking through the body and coming back to her eyes. So, as photographers, as artists, we're always thinking of strategies to hold the viewer's attention. And for me, the gaze was that. That was something that could hold the viewer's attention. I mean, just think of, when because of the device, because of cell phones, computers, whatever, we're inundated with imagery constantly. So, how long does it take to swipe through something on Instagram? Probably on it for maybe 1.5 seconds, if that long, by swiping. Now, what is something that you can use to hold the viewer's attention? What is it in the image that's going to root them there and have them come back to the work 10 seconds later, maybe a minute later, maybe even a week later? What are those strategies? So that having that visual, having the mothers looking directly into the camera, for me was that.
So beautiful, all of them.
Thank you, thank you very much. But following up on research on the Black body and representations, I was still interested in new possibilities, new constructions, because again, art is about problem solving. So I really came across the work of Kehinde Wiley and his piece from his series Down in 2011 and 2008. And this really opened up the door to new possibilities, where I was no longer glued to strict representation, meaning I didn't have to have the mother physically holding the son, because in some instances it wasn't possible. If there were multiple sons, or if the scale of the son was, too large for the mother, or whatever it was, I needed to find a way to still be able to tell the story, but not, potentially not have the physical touch. But just looking at different ways to organize the bodies. Again, different ways to depict these men, again, strong and vulnerable. Now we have the Pietà recreations, these mother-son images, and they were working strongly, but I didn't want the work to be predictable. I didn't want the series to only be these images. It would feel a little empty if it was just these images over and over again. And I've always felt that if the viewer can predict the next step, that you kind of lost them in a sense. So I looked at the work of Frances Kearney and her series, Five People Thinking the Same Thing from 1998. And this really stood out for me as, thinking of these portraits of individuals not looking into the camera. So we're really using, really going off of the set, off of the environment, and what are they doing, and, trying to impart trying to parse out what it is that is going through their minds. And I thought that that could be really poetic for, thinking of the mothers and the project. After the event, after, these tragedies have happened, and using it as a connection to the mothers who have lost, and thinking of these, different keywords that pop up: absence, isolation, loss, remembrance, hope. Just trying to think of, what could be potentially going through their minds after the trial, after, just after the event. What does normal look like? What do, day-to-day activities look like after this has transpired. Again, losing your child for absolutely nothing. So in some of these images, you can sense that there's a second presence or a second figure that should be there that is missing. Some not so much. But again, I want to try to keep that as new and as reinvented as possible.
Right.
And, this is by Carrie Mae Weems from her Kitchen Table series in 1990. Again, a really great example of what I mentioned earlier of, this simple idea, yet, so complex, but, still minimal. Everything happens at this one table with this one light hanging overhead, but the cast of characters changes, the props on the table change, and it's just so layered and so beautiful. But the reason why I'm showing this is because we have this large database of images that we're studying throughout art history. And every time I see something like this, when I'm with a family or I'm on set and it reminds me of something else, I'll absolutely use it as a connection to those images or to those other artists that I've seen before. Again, applying that method to Stranger Fruit.
Oh, for sure.
But again, something was missing, and we have the image of the mothers and sons, we have the images of the mothers in isolation, but the project still felt incomplete, and it took over a year to really figure out what that final part of the project was. So while I was in Chicago in 2016, I was photographing like 6 families over the course of 2 days. You know how Facebook sends you like a reminder that you've been friends with someone for a year or 2 years or whatever that anniversary was? So Nefertiti, actually, this is Nefertiti. She had reposted one of the images that we had made for the project the previous year, and she wrote this amazing poem to go with it. And the second I read the poem, I knew exactly that was the final part of the project. And what she wrote was this: as I hold my son in my arms, there is nothing strange about him. He is indeed the fruit of my womb, the extension of his father and me, growing, stretching, reaching to the skies. There is nothing strange about him. He is heaven in my eyes, an angel in disguise, handcrafted into a beautiful soul. There is nothing strange about him, for he is the fruit that I have bared, which makes me whole. There is nothing strange about him. He is my son, he is my soul, and he is beautiful. Now, I've read that text maybe a million times, and it still affects me every day, every time that I read it. And that really, crystallized the idea that this was the final part of the project, that it was the words of the mothers who are in the series, giving them the opportunity to speak out on what is going on in the country and having them be able to give back. Oftentimes we think of photography as a violent medium where it's a one-way street. The photographer or the artist is taking by way of access, but there's rarely a give back. It's rarely collaborative. It's just I'm taking because I need this for my work. But being able to have their words really helped round everything out. The images are my words, the artist statement are my words, but having the words of the mothers in the series really helped also show that this is something very serious that we're living through right now. So what I did was I created a 5 or 6 question survey or questionnaire or call and response, whatever you want to call it. And after I would get home back to New York, and I would scan, get the film developed and scan the film, and after I would finalize the image, I would send the mothers the image, the finalized image, and the survey, so they could have it as a one-to-one. Because after maybe a week to 3 weeks may have passed since making the image, and it's already a loaded day making the making the work. The answers were just so amazing, and it wasn't just this one note being said. It was this amazing story of love and care, but also fear for something that is very real. And this is just a screenshot of a fraction of the responses. I feel greatly protective and greatly aware of the love and connection I have in my heart and soul for my son. Another mother wrote, I feel sad that mothers actually have to go through this. My son was able to get up and put back on his clothes. Others, not so much. They are still mentally frozen in that position, that sadness, that brokenness. I feel guilty to be relieved that it's just the picture, because for others, it's reality. I feel scared. I feel next. I feel like Tyler could be the next hashtag. And the last text I'll share with you, as I was gradually pulled into the scene and told about the pose, it began to make me think of the daily thoughts I have about my son. I have thoughts of love, change, determination, growth, and encouragement. I also have concerns regarding his health and safety as it relates to the growing conditions across this nation with African American males. There needs to be immediate attention to stop the killing of Black males and suffering of mothers. And also, just as a side note, while the project is speaking directly to a mother-son relationship, we know that just from a few years ago, Sandra Bland, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, it's so much more than, it's not just Black men we're talking about Black trans lives, we're talking about Black women as well. Everyone is still under this umbrella that, has to endure this. But I'm just choosing to speak about just the mother-son connection, just to keep it concise and just to keep it focused in this one area. But, this is what, we're contending with on a daily basis. And the text is so important that it can't be reduced to a caption. So in the solo exhibition, it lives next to the work as this.
Nice.
Now, we can't talk about the work and not talk about the process of how the work is made. So all of this work is shot on film. This is shot with a 4x5 camera. That's my camera. Her name is Lucy. She's over here in the case next to me because we're going on a job tomorrow. And we travel all across the country making these images. And it's kind of crazy. We don't make a lot of images. Pretty much every time I visit with a family, we make between 2 and 4 images, and I'm not bringing my digital camera. It's just Lucy and a light meter, and
Wow.
we make it work as best as possible. And if the image isn't working, we figure out a way to make it work. And there are a lot of reasons why, and I use a mix of cameras. I use whatever the project commands. So for my athlete stuff, it'll be a mix of, maybe 120 digital. For my portrait-based stuff, it'll be mostly 4x5, sometimes medium format as well. But what does it mean for, to be shot on 4x5? I mean, it's a higher quality and a higher resolution, yeah, and all that fun stuff. But, it's really about the mode of working. It's about the slower pace. It's about the attention to detail. And again, working more as a painter, less as a photographer. Like I said, I studied painting independently. So I was, really glued to thinking of it in those terms instead of taking, it was one of those things where it was like getting away from the digital dilemma of making, I could make 100 images to get the 50 that I want or the 5 that I want, but that wouldn't have been the way for this project. I could only, it wouldn't have been the same feeling. There's something about, again, working at one image at a time where the subject is there in that position holding their son, and the emotions are real and you can feel it in the image because there's only one image being made, because there are only a handful of images being made. If I was making 50 images or even like 1,000 images, it would not have the same weight. And I still make mistakes. There's nothing perfect here, but that's also one of the refreshing aspects of using the 4x5. You let go of some of these ideas of perfection and you just obviously try to make it as best as possible. But what is perfection? We're just out here working and trying to make it as good as possible. And something else is important. I'm including the film border around the image, just to reinforce the idea that there's very little manipulation going on. There's no cropping going on here. This is the reality for these families in this moment.
That's beautiful. A lot of these are new to me, like I hadn't seen them on your site or on various like articles on your project.
Something else that's really important for the work, and Timothy kind of alluded to it earlier, where the work is documentary, but it's also performance. And oftentimes we think of performance as video or dance or acting, but the series is based on performance, meaning that these mothers have not lost their sons, but they understand the reality that this could happen to them, that this could happen to someone in their family, that this could happen to someone in their neighborhood very easily. But it's important that that distinction is there. Something else that's really important to the work is thinking of the environment and where the images are made. So, in the first year of the project, I was working in New York, in and around the boroughs, Buffalo, New York, upstate New York, along the Hudson Valley. But this isn't just a New York issue or a big city issue. So that's why it's been important for me to be able to photograph in New York, LA, but also, Chicago, also Alabama, Omaha, Utah, this urban versus rural, this, big cities, small, isolated areas, because again, as we've seen, these tragedies have happened in the most bizarre and remote of locations.
Oh, for sure. I have a question that seems appropriate for now, if I
Sure.
could. So yeah, like looking at your project, it does have, a nationwide scope. And I guess the obvious question is, how are you finding your subjects?
Through friends of friends, through the network. Early on in the first year of the project, it was just like friends and family, folks that I worked with, folks that I knew from the neighborhoods, and I just reached out to them. And the I guess criteria was simple. It was just mothers and sons that we could photograph, and that has its own challenges to find and organize, and it takes a healthy bit of time to organize the families from anywhere from like a couple of weeks to a couple months to figure that out. But yeah, and then moving forward, it was some folks reached out independently. LA was different. I went to LA really with no connections. I just spent a month out there, and I put a bunch of images in a little book, and I just walked up to people on the street and asked folks who I thought could potentially fit for the project. But yeah, through it was mostly through the network. Social media has helped for the last couple locations, but such as like Omaha here. But yeah, it's a big mix. One of the other things that is really important, again, tying into locations, are scouting, because oftentimes I do not have an assistant, and I'm a classic New Yorker. I do not drive. So Google Maps, thank God for Google Maps, because that's how I would do a lot of the scouting for this work, because I would, all of these images are environmental. The families live or work in the areas where I'm making the photographs, almost 95% of them. So I would look around just to see, what is, kind of indicative of the neighborhood. What's a possibility that I could use? And more often than not, even if I don't use something that I see, it at least gives me a landmark where I can say, okay, yeah, this feels like this location, or, this feels like here. This can tell the story of, this space.
Right.
And this is the map of where the project has gone. You have to ignore the triangle on Utah, that we have done Utah. So just imagine that being a little red X or a little fuchsia X. But we've gone to a bunch of different, I keep saying we because I don't like saying I, but I mean me and Lucy. We've gone to a bunch of different locations for the work. And thankfully we're done traveling. Something else that's really, really important to me and for the work is audience. And, what is the target audience for the project? And, every artist probably tell you the same thing, that their work is for everyone. And I will probably say the same thing, but what the hell does that even mean? The work is documentary, it is fine art, it is performance. Typically that work lives in the gallery or the museum, but the gallery or the museum is not the most welcoming of places. Even if it is free, it's a very intimidating space. So I've been interested in, sharing the work in spaces like, this Aperture Foundation back in 2017, but also sharing this work in spaces like this. This is Minka, a holistic healing center in Brooklyn.
Wow.
This is Hamilton Landmark Galleries in Harlem, which is the first floor of a brownstone that's, cleared out, and, they just put on exhibitions here. So the community is invited to come as they are and come and, engage with the work. Just again, a completely different level of engagement when you have the museum or the gallery versus space like this. And I think that it's important that, the work has that kind of reach. This is Brick, which is a community center that holds like a number of community events in downtown Brooklyn. But I wasn't done there as far as the, where to exhibit the work. Through an organization called Art and Ad Places, we were able to get the work on a number of I keep saying bus stops, phone booths in and around the Fulton Street Mall area in Brooklyn. And, again, it was really cool having this there, because at the scale and at this, just how close it was to the people, the proximity, just think of how, like, having this type of image in this space and being able to walk up to it and touch it, and, what that does for the people engaging with it. They may think nothing of it, they may think everything of it. But again, just being able to have the work out there is really important. A year later, I think in 2018 or 19, one of my proposals for this organization called 14 by 48 passed, and they made one of the images a billboard here in Times Square, here near Times Square in the city. And, wow. I was always inspired by the work of Felix Gonzalez Torres, and, the billboards of, this private image, the beds in such a public location. And again, I love just everything that work was doing. And I love that they didn't, put my name or the project name or the, the title on it. I mean, they put the website for the organization, but I love just having the work up there without any further context, again, just so people could see it and, engage with it, or maybe not engage with it, but, think of images. Now think of, billboards, and I'll think of the black body. And how many times have you seen the black body on a billboard, or, at this scale? But then think of it, how many times you've seen it where it's not commodified, where it's not selling something, where it's not for a movie or, selling whatever it is. So that was really, just really important to have. And now that it's folded up somewhere in my closet, waiting to be donated, one day I'll get to it. Okay, we're almost there. I have to, mention Eli Kintz. He's an artist and educator here in the city, in New York City, teaches at FIT. And he had a book called I Remember Daddy, which basically is a long form poem chronicling the life of the Black man from Africa through the Atlantic slave trade and through life in America. And when I first encountered the book, there was like an audio piece that was, someone was reading the poem, and there was like a little screen that went with it. And there were these figures that were like zooming in and zooming out on the screen. And, at first glance, when it's like zoomed in, it looks like a tear, or, it's like a Rorschach test. And as it zooms out, it looks like a tear. And then you realize that, no, it's a lynched body. And this is kind of where, along with the Nina Simone version of Strange Fruit, where the project gets its title from. The song Strange Fruit, of course, speaking to Black bodies hanging from southern trees in the antebellum South. Stranger Fruit, a play on that, thinking that, these lynchings are no longer happening, but these are almost modern day lynchings that we're enduring. These men, these, women, these fruits of the community, the lives being cut short. And again, for absolutely nothing. Yeah, and that's it. That's the last slide. 61, we made it. Look at that.
That was fun. Absolutely.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to switch cameras here so I can kind of talk to the class.
Sure.
And I'm sure we're going to have a bunch of questions here. No, that was wonderful. So give me a time frame again, because it really seems like everyone in this class, and the different guests we have are all people who are sharing one project. And the amount of great images you have is astounding, but then also all the different forms it's taken. So what's the timeline again?
So it's from so it's about 8 years, from 2014 until, what year is this? Is 2022?
2022, yes.
So essentially 21 was when the last image was made. It's not in the presentation, but Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh yeah.
Again, crazy enough, if you're into religion, the project came to a close on Easter Sunday, of all days. Wow. The day of the resurrection was the last image that I made. But that was that was the last image, and just been working on the book since then. But yeah, it's about a 7 or 8 years, pretty much 7 for making images.
Yeah. No, and that's a fascinating, that's a healthy amount of time for sure. And then, but now it's also, there's a book that you're working on right now. Yes. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, we've been working on the book for pretty much the last year. Maybe 2017. Again, after the texts from the mothers started to come in, was when I started to realize that the book is the only way to really appreciate all of the text, because in the solo exhibitions, like sometimes I get to show the texts, sometimes only like a handful of them. But there are a lot of them, and for the book, it's going to be 23 or 24 selections from those texts, including with the 59 images. So yeah, it looks really good. I've been going through the PDF for the book, and we have a pre-sale on the book going on right now. It'll be out sometime September or October, most likely October. But yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's kind of crazy, but it's really exciting. It's really overwhelming, but it's okay. We'll survive.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting. When I spoke to you yesterday, there was just a little snippet of your life there that sounded very good. Where it was like you were teaching a class, and then you were going to Barcelona to check on the page proofs, and then you were moving to LA to teach a little bit, correct?
Yeah.
But New York is home for.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone has questions here. And we had students submit questions, but we have so many people in class now. Why don't we just, ask via Zoom or in class? Let's start with in class. Anybody have a question they want to? Ofer Tenenbaum? Sure. And then, let's film the students and you can kind of see what they're talking.
Hey, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Love your work. I'm just going to repeat the question that I had in the form. So I was born in Israel, and over there, on the average, we have a soldier die a day since the establishment of the state, and there's a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow and stuff like this. But over there, nobody is willing to expose that. Like there have been some attempts of trying to expose, sorrow and grief, and families tend to close in. They don't want to share. They don't want to talk about it and stuff like this. So I'm wondering, if you encountered any pushback, any reaction saying, no, this is exploiting our our grief, or was it all supportive? And then the second question that I had there, that is completely not that emotional, is I noticed that a lot of the photos that you have, you're maintaining the frame of the film. And I was just wondering if this just like a pride, like, hey, I made it in film and I want to make sure that the viewer understands that that's in film, or if there is some, other element to that of the black frame around.
Mhm. So yeah, for the second question first, real quick. Again, I mentioned it earlier. It was just keeping the film border, and I know that can be, kind of weird, where some people like exploit it, like, oh, hey, I shot it on film, people should care now. It was really just to reinforce the idea that there was no manipulation going on. There's no like cropping or other like manipulation techniques happening in the image. I just wanted to like reinforce that this was the reality for these families in this moment and in this location. And also the thin black border around it just gave it an additional weight. So it had like this inherent frame to it already.
Okay.
For the first question, was there pushback? Not so much. I mean, there were families who did not feel comfortable putting themselves in that position, and I can absolutely understand that. I mean, it's a lot of emotion to pose with your child as if they were dead. And
Right.
even in some of the texts that are included in the book, you can like read to that. But it was one of those things where people were, just happy to be seen from the African American community, to be seen and heard. And again, it being from a black artist, that helped, give them that agency. They were just happy that someone was talking about it. Someone was, speaking to that, people may have heard, Black Lives Matter and XYZ and all these other things, but never really given it much thought or to the nuance that is there. So this was just another avenue, another entry point for that. So it's been pretty supportive, overwhelmingly supportive, making the work, and that's been pretty great.
Thank you.
That's good.
Thank you.
Another question.
Okay.
Lexus.
What was the response from the male models having to pose in such like a vulnerable way? Because I know a lot of times Black men have a lot of pride and don't want to be seen in that nature. So what was the response to that?
Great question. It depends, because there's such a varying age range in the project. Some of the older folks, some of the older like friends or whoever is in the project, they understood it pretty immediately, and it didn't take much, prodding to say that, hey, this is what I'm doing, and will you do this? And I think also some of them realized that it wasn't about the individual, it was about the collective. It wasn't like solely about them. It was about them and really about their mother. So it was really the mother that I had to speak to really, get on board with the work. And the guys were pretty solid all the way through. I think there was only one son who was like maybe 13 who had no interest in being in the photo at the time, but his mother was like, we're doing this, and that's the end of it. And her image is pretty amazing, where she just like lifts him up and carries him. But no, the sons, the men in the project were incredibly supportive and really showed up, as did the mothers, who again I give all the credit to in the project.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. On Zoom here, let's see, Suntani, did you have a question? I'm just picking random.
Yeah, I actually did. I just wanted to start off by saying that I really respect you as a photographer and your project, just due to the amount of research and passion behind it. And I have to say that so far you're my favorite guest speaker, because there's a certain type of like connection and uniqueness to photographing a community that you're a part of versus a community that you're just interested in. And I think that as a collective, we've turned a blind eye to violence against Black people for too long. But you're able to, connect with people in this certain way, in a way that doesn't really need viewer discretion, I guess you could say. But my question is that I saw on your website that you had a public installation in Italy, I believe. But all of the images that you shot were within the United States. And I guess I was just wondering, or why you chose Italy. I obviously, like violence against Black people happens worldwide. But other than spreading awareness about what's happening in America, I wasn't sure what the connection with Italy was.
Great question. So I've been, again, thinking of audience for the work and where to exhibit it. They reached out maybe a couple months to almost a year in advance. The curator for that exhibition was interested in showing the work. And, it's crazy because, again, the work has gotten such a, positive response from all around the globe. Beautiful, but also stressful. Just in that, this, basically it's from, the work has exploded twice. The work exploded in 2017 when it first had this exhibition in the Summer Open show at Aperture Foundation. And then that spawned a number of exhibitions after that. And then, of course, in 2020, when the world was on fire after Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and George Floyd. So that kind of coincided with that exhibition happening last summer. But it was just this large, photography festival where a number of, photographers are showing work, and they wanted to do the work as an installation on light boxes in this garden. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do it. Again, a public installation on light boxes, that sounds pretty amazing. And again, just like I said, people from Italy, from Germany, France, Spain, England, Korea, Brazil have been, reaching out about the work, Mexico City, reaching out about the work and wanting to share it. So it's been, kind of overwhelming that, even though this is obviously just it's a global issue, but I'm focusing on an American viewpoint of it, again, keeping it concise, just like, keeping it concise with just the mother-son relationship, that it could have such traction and people could really resonate with the work. So that's kind of how that came to be and why. That answers the question.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Elsewhere on Zoom, Tiffany, did you have a question?
Hey, yes, are you still doing this project or is it finished?
The project is finished, thankfully. I think I've said all that I need to say with the project, and I could photograph it for the rest of my life, but I sure as hell don't want to.
Sure.
There are other things I would like to work on.
What do you think you'll work on next?
So right now I'm working on, man, that's unfair. Right now I'm working on an experimental video piece revolving around Black masculinity. So I started it in maybe 2019, pulling some video, and it's video that I'm creating, but also video that I'm pulling from like pop culture and movies and stuff like that. And I've shot a bunch of it this year as well, and it probably won't be ready anytime soon. But it's really just focusing on Black masculinity and movement. So like just Black men running. So
Yeah,
I'm really just studying that and doing again the research and the groundwork and organizing. My Google Drive looks pretty crazy if you take a look at all the folders that have all the elements in there. So.
Well, I'm excited to see it. This was awesome. Thank you so much. Excuse my daughter.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
My babysitter decided to bail on me today.
That happens.
The more the merrier.
Yeah, I had a question that kind of springs from Tiffany's. Is like, how do you know when to end a project?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't really know. I mean, for this project, it was about the locations. I knew that as we came close to the end of the project, or the last 2, maybe 3 years, there were a couple locations that I had on my sheet that I really wanted to go to. Hey, I have oh my God, I have the original map here. It's a little beat up, but it's also like 8 years old, so deal with it. The thing's been in my notebook forever. But anyway, so like I really wanted to go to Mississippi. I really wanted to go to Omaha. I really wanted to go to Utah, because I was like, yeah, there have to be Black people in Salt Lake City, right? And I know the only Black people in Nebraska are in Omaha or Lincoln. So it was just a matter of, making the connections and getting out there. And after it became apparent that Omaha and Salt Lake City were going to happen, that was really it, because it takes so much to find the families,
Mhm.
especially like in remote locations like that, where I don't have, much of a footing. Like I have, I'm reaching out to people through like social media, and they're helping to, get the word spread, and, we're trying to find folks as good as possible, but it's just, it's difficult. But yeah, also at that point, after, 2019 was a really busy year for the project. I think I made the most images in that one year than any single year. And then, 2020, the world was on fire again. And, after that, it was just a few more locations that I felt like, we've said everything. The work is, been out there, it's been exposed, people have seen it. Now it's time to, wrap it up strongly, and then start working on the book, and we go from there.
Right. Right. No, well stated. I mean, I have a philosophy that it is very hard for photographers to end projects, because when you end it, then you got to figure out what you're going to do next. And it's easy to stay in the comfort of a project, And I think every project I've done, I've always been like, I should have ended it a year early, but a year I did,
Yeah. I mean, with the video project, like I knew that I already wanted to get a leg up on that.
Yeah.
But again, like I did the first video piece in 2019, and I haven't gone back to it until this year. And it is just because there was no time, because Stranger Fruit just absorbs all of my time and effort. So I have no, like, for pretty much for 3.5 years, just like if I'm not teaching, I'm working on Stranger Fruit. Right, whether it's writing, grant proposals, or lectures, or finding families, or working on the book. So it's it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's great, but it's a lot too.
Yeah. No, you can love it, and it can be a lot of work all at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question, Garen.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hey, John, thank you for sharing your time with us today. One thing that keeps popping into my head is, I guess, like the emotional baggage of this in relation to you as an artist. Because like when I photograph people and it's about them, like I have to decompress after the shoot for like a couple hours, but like it sounds like you are so good at keeping up with the speed of all of this. And I understand like you recognize the importance, but I want to know on a personal level, like how hard is it going to these places and meeting these families, and then being able to keep going on with the shoot? I mean, just looking at your work and the gravity it holds.
Great question. It's extremely difficult. I don't know how I do it. All I know is to make one image, and then make the next image, and then figure it out from there. It's very heavy, and it's very emotionally taxing. And every time we make an image, it's reliving Sean Bell and reliving those initial feelings of 2006. I didn't mention it earlier, but why like Sean Bell was so important was because Amadou Diallo happened maybe a couple years prior, maybe a year and a half prior. Again, that was another murder, New York, NYPD murder here in the city. I was too young for Rodney King in '91. Like I knew something important had happened, but also I wasn't living in LA. If I lived in LA through the riots, then maybe it would have had a different weight. But again, Sean Bell was so impactful, and just like everything about that. And in the book, I also write about this one image in the newspaper that I showed of his friend face down on the pavement, and just again like how images stay with you and stay with you for such a long time. So yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, well, I guess when the book comes out, I'll be glad to hold it in my hands and finally be over with it. And that's also why jumping back to starting the new project, I was really even though Black masculinity, again, something that's trauma based, but I'm also interested in working on stuff that's not as trauma based, to show the community laughing, enjoying life, because it can be really overwhelming when you really think about it and look at all the things that are going on, and then what's being done about it. And then, so I was doing a lecture or a panel discussion or whatever, maybe a year and a half ago with a couple activists and a poet. And the poet said, one word that like stayed with me like all night and pretty much since then, and it was just sanctuary. And what is sanctuary for Black folks, where we don't have to deal with this shit. Sorry, my language. We're recording, right? Sorry. Where we don't have to deal with this stuff, on a constant basis, having to think about, things like Akron, things like Buffalo, just a couple weeks prior, things like what happened in Texas, not even a month ago.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a weight on your shoulder, and it's a lot to process and a lot to think about. And you gotta try to put you first as best as possible to, decompress as best you can and find the joy in doing it. But yeah, it's still this ever-present thing that's looming overhead. So I don't know if I really have an answer for it, but that was as best as I could think of.
Yeah, that was amazing information. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Other questions here? Bea, did you have anything?
No, I was amazed by the entire work, and the poem got me really emotional, and the people staring is like, it's so striking emotionally and beautiful in the light, the way that you did the whole work. I don't have a question. I just want to tell you that it was very, very, got me very emotional. It's beautiful work.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Susan, you have something?
Yeah, I did, and I thought it tied in nicely with you, and now it ties in with Garen's comment too. I found the depth of a mother's grief is, I would think, it's unfathomable. You're not supposed to bury your children, and I also felt, in looking at your images, that there were so many different layers to your approach to this sense of grief, stemming from, the Pietà, the sort of that iconic sculpture and that iconic pose, a mother mourning their child. And then also your locations, I felt they also personified grief, because they were mostly absent of other people. And when there was other people in them, the other people were just like, life goes on. And when you lose somebody, I think that's an incredibly shocking aspect of it, that your whole life has been shattered, and you walk out the door and people are bickering about, this, or wanting to go grocery shopping. And so there was a level of normalcy to all your environments, including the locations, like a playground or in front of a house or in front of a market. And that normalcy sort of emphasizes, I don't want to say complacency, but we were talking about this, what just happened in Akron. It's like, how is this still happening, right?
Mhm.
And life yet continues to go on. I would have thought it would be very emotional for you as well, and you did speak to that, but the mothers in holding their children from a community where, that is something that they're aware of all the time. Their sons can be killed for no reason at all. And I was wondering, and I did see it, actually, you mentioned this, I did see it as a collaboration. All the images I viewed, I felt it was a collaboration of work. And I would have felt that the emotional intensity would have been very high. And for the mothers, I only had read 2 of the poems, I think. I was just wondering how it was at the end of the shoot for those mothers to have portrayed something that can actually happen to their children, and then really, know that they're lucky. It's like this sort of thing. So yeah, I was just curious about those collaborations and how your sitters felt post-shooting.
Yeah.
Posing.
Post image making. Yeah. See, again, violence and photography. We got to get away from that word shooting. It was interesting making the images, and you'll see it in the texts in the book, as it's this wide range of responses. Some of them, I remember, Ebony, for example, she was the mother from Jersey City, where her two sons are helping her hold up the one son. And she was talking about, as we were walking back to the house, she had reached out about being a part of the project. So she had seen the work and was familiar with it. And then when I asked her to be a part of it, they all jumped at the opportunity. But even with that, knowledge going in, she still wasn't prepared for it in the moment. And, she spoke about how, she was, fighting back the tears, trying to be strong, to hold the physical weight, but also the emotional weight of, his 17 years potentially flashing before her eyes as we walk back to the house. So it's, it obviously it hits some folks differently. But in those texts, you really get to feel like, yeah, it's difficult, and it's really heavy for everybody involved. And again, I give all the credit to the mothers and the project for being in a space where they can be so vulnerable, because again, many have turned it down for obvious reasons. They didn't want themselves to be portrayed that way. They didn't want their sons to be portrayed in that light, or they didn't want to even imagine for a second that this could happen to them. But again, this is the world we're living in, and this is the reality that this still is happening. So,
Yeah, I can't imagine that that sort of visceral emotional connection lingers well beyond the photograph between you and the people that you have photographed.
Slow-bless, yes.
Thanks for your work. It was profound on so many levels for me, and I really appreciate it. And
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The one question I have in the way of this is like, because we're all creators here, and this project, like, everybody likes it, and I'm wondering, have you ever gotten anyone, any pushback where someone was like, nah, not into that, this is crossing a line I'm not comfortable with, or like, has there been any backlash?
I mean, the support for the project has been, responses to the project have been overwhelmingly positive. I don't get enough hate mail. That does kind of bother me, but I guess I'll be all right. I get some hate mail, not a lot.
Yeah.
But again, we don't really. Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, again, it's been like so positive that like maybe people like on whatever, like on social media may say something in the comments, but I'm not reading that stuff. Facebook or whatever, like I don't fucking care. Like we're not talking about it. I mean, it was kind of stressful, like in 2017, 18, and even 19, when trying to get funding for the work, because the work is the work, and it's been it had already exploded in 2017, but it wasn't like really getting further than that, and I couldn't tell if that was because of who I was, or if the work was too political, or were people just not because you never get these answers when you apply for grants or you apply for exhibitions or whatever. You just get two emails. One says thank you and the other one says congratulations. And when you get the email that says thank you, you just curse because you're like, damn, I didn't get it. So yeah, I mean, you have to deal with that as well. But no, again, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. But if people would like to send hate mail, I would like that too.
You'd like to receive that. Yeah,
it's okay, because I'll respond, but then I'm going to block you and then never hear from you again.
I always did. I did a project that got its share of hate mail for sure. Many projects that got a lot of hate mail, and to me it was always interesting. I mean, there is that idea that you cannot please everyone, and you don't want to. But there's all sorts of opinions, and if I can like something, I can dislike something too. And those things are equal. I think. A question I have is, because like our school here is very kind of vocational in a way. Could you tell us how you support yourself?
How do I support myself? Do I make money? Maybe, I guess I make money. I don't know. Geez.
Wait, did you just talk to Lucy?
Yeah, I was asking her. She said we have a shoot tomorrow. I was like, oh, that's how we make money. Then I remembered we're not making any money on that shoot tomorrow. So it's okay. I'm kidding. It's for New York Times, but it's not a lot of money. But whatever, it doesn't matter. It's not about the money. It's about the money. We'll be okay. All right. Okay, so how do we make money? From early on it was really difficult. So from 2000, so I worked as a teaching assistant for a number of years at New York Film Academy, where I now teach. And that was cool because I was also assisting a lot of photographers in and around the city, and that was helping to pay the bills. But the project is very involved, so I stopped assisting for a while so that I could focus on writing for the project, writing for grants, writing for all of this other stuff. I also stopped hanging out with friends. I was like, dude, I gotta like work. And then our hours kind of got cut, and I ended up paying my rent like 3 months late. Like, what was it? No, 21 days late, like 3 months in a row. That was kind of rough. So I was like, I better get a new job or else it's going to be trouble. So I worked at a rental house, a photo video rental house here in the city for about like a year and a half up until the pandemic started. And that kind of held me over because, I got to, one, we're shooting on film. Two, I got to travel to these locations, and basically I'm working around their schedule. So if they're like, hey, we can only do next week, I'm like, okay, guess what? I'm either taking a train or I'm taking a flight next week to these locations, and I'm getting a hotel, et cetera, et cetera. So it had been kind of crazy trying to finance everything and trying to fund it. But I was interested in staying in the industry as best as possible. So that's why I was assisting. That's why I was working in a photo video rental house, or at least I was still in the what do you call it, in photography, in the arts, and I made a lot of connections through that as well. So that's what really helped. And in like the recent years since 2020, I've just been teaching. Thankfully, that's been pretty cool, and doing commissions. So magazines hit me up. They're like, hey, do you want to photograph XYZ? I was like, you paying? They're like, yeah. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Let's do it. So.
Oh, so a combination of teaching and shooting.
Yes, teaching and commissions and making images. So like just last week. So like right now I'm like retouching stuff for David's Werner Gallery for like a photo shoot that I did like a week and a half ago. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do it.
Oh, very nice. And then you had mentioned to me on the phone that you are interested in teaching high school students photography.
Yes, I love high school kids. Oh, God bless. Because high school is crazy, and they need that voice to challenge them because they think they know things, and I'm here to tell them you don't know anything. And then just gotta. So me and the high school kids have a nice little balance going. But it's also, it's also important to shape, to nurture them. And it's a fine line between tough love and just straight up comedy. So that's why I do love high school. I teach everybody. I teach, and I'm at Main Media, do their MFA program. They're all, folks who are retired. So
yeah,
we go back and forth, teach whoever.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Hey, you have been very generous. Yeah, do you have other questions?
Well, it's a question that you and I had when we started earlier today. John, do you remember seeing Tim's work while you were studying?
Yes, we spoke about it briefly yesterday. One of my homeboys, Jaime Permuth, a Guatemalan photographer, when I used to TA his class, he used to read the essay from Photographs Not Taken at the start of every new cohort. And he would have me come in and I would read to the class because, I also do public speaking, I guess. So I would come in and I would read a little essay about some guy named Timothy Archibald. Have you ever heard of him? And he didn't put film in his camera this one time. Crazy. So I would tell them that story. And so that's kind of how, but for my classes that I teach, like Place and Identity, my MFA class that I teach, and all the long form classes as well, because it's all project based. I show them echolalia almost all the time. Probably not the first week, but probably like the third week, fourth week when we start talking about families. So we often talk about his work. Don't tell him though. I know the camera's not on.
I know, but what we've seen, if you look at your commercial work, you guys share some of the DNA of, there's a lot of similarity between your commercial work and Tim's commercial work. So I didn't know if you had some, you know.
For like the commissions that I do, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. That's really just, it's interesting because it's a byproduct of Stranger Fruit and Lucy, where folks know that, you know, I work with a 4x5, and when they hire me, they're like, hey, you know, we've seen the environmental portraiture that you've done, take that and apply it to these artist portraits, or to, you know, whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, cool. You know, I'm just gonna make like 10 images and I'm gonna go home, right? And they're like, yeah, okay. So okay.
That kind of free range that, like, remember, because Tim, when you tell us about your work, you say, you know, people hire me because they want me to do not commercial, but just to be me. And that sounds the same.
No, editorial, the editorial market gives you that freedom.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's critical, and that's why, you know, the personal work, the work that you make for yourself is so important, because that's your style. That's what, you know, hopefully you will be getting hired to do. Like, look at someone like, you know, Eleanor Carucci. You know, her work is all about family and the body, and all the stuff that she's hired for is exactly the same stuff. We're just like, oh, cool.
No, she's an excellent example. Hey, let's see. Does anyone else have any questions on Zoom? And I want to be respectful of your time. Oh yeah, it's your time.
Sorry, it's not really about Stranger Fruit, but more so your commercial work. I'm going through your Instagram right now, and I saw that you photographed Jordan Fisher, who I love. And since all of us are relatively amateur photographers, I guess my question would be like, how do you get your work out there? Like, where is it mainly just connections, or like what was your experience, for example?
Connections help, but one of the pieces of advice that I got from Deb Willis, who's like the foremost authority on Black art in the country and the chair at NYU, was to harass young curators, because the work goes in, you know, galleries and museums. So it was like, okay, who are the young curators? Who are the decision makers who are deciding on what work is going where? And try to align myself with them. One, because they, like on Instagram or whatever, like they'll post opportunities, but also just to make sure that they know the name, and they, you know, we have some type of dialogue where they've seen the work or whatever, because you never know what will pop up. So it's either that, you know, curators, or if it's like magazine work, it's like editors. You know, who are the people who are the photo editors for whatever publications that you're interested in, et cetera, and trying to go that route. I mean, there's no one answer for it, but it's the network, it's those connections, and it's, you know, just, but who are the decision makers, and, you know, harassing them. Not harassing them, don't harass them, but you know, you don't
Work in front of them and being politely assertive.
Yeah, just, you know, just like, hey, how you doing? You know.
Now I would assume that the attention Stranger Fruit got has opened doors in both the commercial world and obviously the art world. Is that true?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, doing all of this work, you know, and again, I picked the path, but, you know, doing all this work, you know, without an MFA, it's like, you know, people like often don't even look at you, don't have an MFA for a certain like gallery and museum posts. So it's, but it's great, because now you can see like actually if good work can shine through. It's a ton of work, but it can happen. So, you know, and it's just from really just having somewhat of an idea and then a game plan, and just me going into attack mode. And again, I didn't have a target end date for the work. It was just, you know, let me just keep making these images. Let me, you know, this is one location, this is the next location, and just keep working. So I wasn't thinking about, oh, I have to have this done by 2017 or 2018. It was just, I got to keep going, got to keep pushing, and I'll, you know, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Nice. That makes sense. No, excellent question. Any other questions? Oh yeah, Susan. Yeah.
Basic, high photographer kind of question. What was your path that led you to photography initially?
My parents were amateur photographers. always had a little 35mm camera, and I first got a digital camera way back when, eons ago, and I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. So I kind of grew up on digital, but then also came back to like disposable cameras. But like I said, I studied painting independently. While I was supposed to be in college, I was depressed and I was cutting school, and I was going to hang out at the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and just stared at paintings all day until I felt better. So that's kind of like how the intro to art began. And I was always interested in, like, I guess, conceptual work and conceptual work in portraiture. And it kind of just grew from there. And then I, did a photography course in 2010. And when I finished, that's when I started, working as a teaching assistant and assisting other photographers. And that's kind of how it all grew. It's kind of a crazy timeline. It's actually a really crazy timeline, because like after I finished that 1-year program, I went back to my old high school, photographed their football season for a season, and then used those images to like elbow my way into photographing the Mets, because I found the contact information for the staff photographer there, which is like, you can't find any of the staff photographers because they're like life positions, like Supreme Court, but less creepy. And they hold those jobs forever. And yeah, but I kept calling this dude. I was like, yo, let me get on the field. What's up? How can we make this happen? How can I get an internship or something? And he let me in, and I photographed them for a season. And then I realized that everybody's making the same images, and I got real bored, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was interested in making more conceptual work, and that's kind of how that started, which is on the website. Just looking at athletes and looking at work more conceptually, and next thing you know, I started Stranger Fruit, and while working on that other stuff, and here we are.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. I want to be mindful of your time, so if there's nothing else, let's thank you. Thank you very much for coming. This was kick-ass.